Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken says a permanent military presence in Afghanistan was never intended. He was addressing a press conference during a surprise visit to Kabul following the U.S. decision to withdraw troops by the 11th of September. Blinken said the threat from al-Qaeda has degraded and warned the Taliban of a firm response if they attack U.S. troops during the withdrawal process. The Taliban have said that the U.S. will be responsible for any future consequences for breaching the Doha peace deal. The United States has imposed new sanctions on Russia over alleged election interference and malicious cyber activities. The sanctions target over 30 Russian entities and include the expulsion of 10 diplomats. The Russian Foreign Ministry says Moscow's response to these sanctions will be unavoidable. In Vienna, Iran and global powers have resumed talks aimed at the revival of the 2015 nuclear deal. The new round of talks follows Iran's decision to boost uranium enrichment in response to an attack on its key nuclear sites blamed on Israel. The US and EU warned that Iran's decision is contrary to efforts to revive the accord. In Iraq, 4 people have been killed and 17 wounded in a car bomb attack in Baghdad. There is no immediate claim of responsibility for the attack. The attack comes hours after drone strikes targeted U.S. troops in Erbil and a Turkish military base in northern part of the country. The global number of COVID-19 cases has crossed 138 million, while the death toll is approaching 3 million. India has registered its highest ever single-day spike with over 200,000 fresh infections as its caseload has topped 14 million. In Pakistan, 118 more people died and over 5,400 tested positive overnight. And in tennis, Rafael Nadal beat Grigor Dimitrov in straight sets to qualify for the semi-finals of the Monte Carlo Masters. He will face the winner of a match between Andrei Rublev and Roberto Bautista Agut. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, a day after U.S. President Joe Biden said that he is pulling out U.S. forces after nearly 20 years of war, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken flew to Kabul in an unannounced visit to show support for the Afghan government. He met President Ashraf Ghani and assured him of the U.S. commitment to Afghanistan.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Kabul to brief the Afghan leadership on the troops' withdrawal decision to be completed by the 11th of September. He addressed a press conference at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul to allay concerns over the U.S. decision.
As President Biden announced yesterday, we're withdrawing our troops by the 20th anniversary of 9/11. We've achieved the objective we set out nearly 20 years ago. We never intended to have a permanent military presence here. The threat from al-Qaeda in Afghanistan is significantly degraded.
Blinken said that there is no military solution to the protracted conflict in Afghanistan and warned the Taliban of a firm response if they attack U.S. troops during the withdrawal process.
The only path forward to a durable, lasting, and just end to the conflict is through negotiation, is through a political agreement, and ultimately is through compromise. And I hope that the Taliban understands that as well. If as our forces are withdrawing, the Taliban were to attack them, it would be met with a very forceful response.
Even as Blinken visited Kabul, the Taliban reiterated a call for an immediate withdrawal of all foreign forces. They accused Washington of breaching a February 2020 accord secured by the Trump administration to complete the troops' pullout by the 1st of May. Regional countries, including China and Pakistan, have urged the U.S. to withdraw its troops in a responsible manner. A statement by Pakistan's foreign ministry said the drawdown needs to coincide with the progress in the Afghan peace process. All eyes are now on the upcoming Istanbul meeting on the peace process next week.
Meanwhile, the Taliban have killed 10 Afghan soldiers in an attack on an army base in southern Zabul province. According to local officials, an army commander was among those killed in the raid. A Taliban spokesperson said they completely conquered the military base. It said the group seized a large cache of weapons and other equipment. Violence remains rampant in Afghanistan despite ongoing peace efforts to end the conflict. Now, the U.S. has imposed new sanctions on Russia over alleged election interference and malicious cyber activities. The sanctions target over 30 Russian entities and include the expulsion of 10 diplomats. Washington has also issued an executive order barring the U.S. financial institutions from buying ruble-denominated bonds. In concert with the EU, Britain, Australia and Canada, the US also sanctioned 8 individuals associated with the alleged Russian repression in Crimea. Russia has denied the allegations and said Moscow's response to the sanctions will be unavoidable. Meanwhile, Kyiv says Russia will bear consequences if it crosses Ukraine's state border. Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba says Moscow needs to know that the cost of escalation in Donbass will be painful. Baltic foreign ministers are visiting Ukraine to what Estonia called express their support to Kyiv. The ministers of Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia condemned the military escalation by Russia in eastern Ukraine. They urged Moscow to ease tensions in the region and return to negotiations. Meanwhile, Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said Ankara is not picking a side in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. Earlier, German Chancellor Angela Merkel and the US President Joe Biden called on Russia to pull back troops from the Ukrainian border. Now, moving on, in Vienna, Iran and global powers have resumed talks aimed at the revival of the 2015 nuclear deal. The new round of talks follows Iran's decision to boost uranium enrichment in response to an attack on its key nuclear site blamed on Israel. The United States and European Union have warned that Iran's decision is contrary to efforts to revive the accord abandoned by Washington 3 years ago. European Union powers are acting as intermediaries in indirect talks between Iran and the US that began in Vienna last week. They have described the first round of talks as a constructive step towards salvaging the pact. Now, in Yemen, Arab coalition says it has destroyed 5 ballistic missiles and 4 explosive-laden drones launched by the Houthis towards Saudi Arabia. In a statement, the coalition said all strikes attempted to target the southern Saudi city of Jazan. The Houthis claim they have hit Saudi Aramco's oil facility, a Patriot anti-missile structure, and other targets in Jazan. In a tweet, Houthi spokesperson said a strike on the oil facility set it on fire. Now, in Iraq, 4 people have been killed in a car bomb attack in the southern city neighborhood of the capital, Baghdad. Medical officials say 17 others have been wounded in the blast. Police said that the car was parked at a busy second-hand equipment market. No group has yet claimed responsibility for the attack. It comes hours after drone strikes targeted U.S. troops near Erbil Airport and a Turkish military base in northern Iraq. The U.S. says it is ready to facilitate Lebanon and Israel in resolving their conflict on shared maritime borders. On a visit to Beirut, U.S. Under-Secretary of State David Hale said Border talks with Israel will have benefits for the crisis-hit Lebanese economy. After a meeting with President Michel Aoun, Hale criticized Lebanese leaders for failing to end the political deadlock. He also warned of punitive measures against those who continue to obstruct progress in Lebanon. Hale accused Hezbollah and Iran of undermining the stability in the country. Lebanon and Israel launched maritime negotiations last year after 5 years of U.S. diplomacy, which have since stalled. Moving on now, in Myanmar, several people are injured after security forces opened fire on a pro-democracy protest by medical workers in the city of Mandalay. Witnesses say deaths are feared as the number of civilians killed since the February 1st coup nears 750. Local media said security forces also arrested some medical workers who have been at the forefront of the anti-coup campaign. Meanwhile, the government forces have suffered heavy casualties in an assault on ethnic Kachin forces in the north. The Kachin Independence Army has claimed killing around 100 troops during the fight over the last 24 hours. Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan has strongly criticized Italy's Prime Minister Mario Draghi for calling him a dictator. Erdogan said Draghi's statement was a total impertinence and disrespect. The Turkish president said Draghi has unfortunately torpedoed the bilateral ties. Erdogan added the Italian Prime Minister was appointed and not elected. He suggested Draghi lacked the democratic legitimacy to make such criticism. Last week, Draghi said Erdogan had humiliated European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen during her visit to Ankara. Now, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, security forces have killed a person during protests against the UN peacekeepers in the eastern city of Oicha. Since last week, locals have staged several protests over the killings of armed groups. They have blamed the UN mission's inability to prevent the civilian killings. Despite the 12,000-strong UN mission, over 300 people have been killed in eastern Congo this year. Amnesty International has called for an international probe in human rights violations in Ethiopia's Tigray region. The rights body said Eritrean forces killed 3 civilians in Tigray on the 12th of April. In a statement, it said at least 19 others were injured after Eritrean troops suddenly opened fire on people in Adwa town. It added a probe must be carried out in the incidents, including war crimes. Amnesty's East Africa Deputy Director Sarah Jackson said deliberate attacks on civilians are prohibited by international law. Now, this comes more than 2 weeks after Ethiopia announced that Eritrea will withdraw its forces from Tigray. Meanwhile, in the U.S., defense witnesses continue to testify in favor of Derek Chauvin at the George Floyd murder trial. A medical expert says he believes Floyd's death occurred from erratic heartbeats caused by his cardiac disease. Talking to the jury, Dr. David Fowler disputed the findings that police restraining starved Floyd's body of oxygen. Fowler said exhaust fumes from the nearby police car may also have contributed to Floyd's death.
Would have the toxicology, the fentanyl and methamphetamine. There is exposure to a vehicle exhaust, so potentially carbon monoxide poisoning, or at least an effect from increased carbon monoxide in his bloodstream, and paraganglionoma, or the other natural disease process that he has. So all of those combined to cause Mr. Floyd's death.
Well, we still have news for you in this news bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, the global number of COVID-19 cases has crossed 138 million, while the death toll is approaching 3 million. India has registered its highest ever single-day spike with over 200,000 infections as its caseload has topped 14 million. More about the pandemic around the world in this report.
As the COVID-19 variants continue to wreak havoc during the latest and most devastating wave of the pandemic, the administrative and technical glitches hamper vaccination drives across many nations. The United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has reported about 5,800 COVID-19 infections in people who were fully vaccinated. Meanwhile, experts have warned that Brazil's P1 variant behind the deadly surge in the country is mutating in ways that could make it more dangerous.
The P1 accumulating mutations in this region can make the situation increasingly similar to the South African region and more difficult to neutralize.
The latest wave is getting worse in Europe as well. Turkey has imposed another lockdown for the first 2 weeks of Ramadan as it reported its highest daily spike in infections. Portugal has extended the state of emergency for 15 days to control the pandemic. Sweden has paused the planned rollout of Johnson & Johnson's vaccine. However, France has announced to continue the jab's use. Meanwhile, the European Union has announced to procure 50 million more Pfizer vaccines in the second quarter of 2021.
And this is why I'm pleased to announce that we have reached an agreement with BioNTech Pfizer to once again speed up the delivery of vaccines. 50 million additional doses of BioNTech Pfizer vaccines will be delivered in Q2 beginning in April.
In India, the latest wave of COVID-19 has prompted a new exodus as low-paid workers are starting to flee the cities en masse just like a year ago. Meanwhile, Bangladesh has entered a week-long complete lockdown as new cases and deaths are hitting record highs.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 118 more people have lost their lives to COVID-19 in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the nationwide death toll has exceeded 15,800. It said over 5,300 people have tested positive for the virus overnight, while the caseload has exceeded 739,000. The Health Ministry's data shows that there are currently more than 77,000 active cases in the country. The ministry says more than 646,000 people have recovered from the disease so far. Meanwhile, more than 5,100 patients are hospitalized across the country. Now, Russia says it may soon resume cross-border shipment with North Korea. Russia's ambassador in Pyongyang, Alexander, said there is no famine in North Korea, but life is difficult. In an interview, he said the economic strife in North Korea is bad, but not as bad as the 1990s depression. Matsugara said the resumption of the six-party multilateral dialogue for denuclearization is not only possible, but also inevitable. He said the Russian-Chinese roadmap for a Korean settlement at its final stage provides for the launch of multilateral negotiations. This, he said, will form a regional security system with the participation of all interested parties. The Russian ambassador is one of the very few ambassadors left in North Korea. Now, China has joined South Korea in opposing Japan's decision of dumping nuclear wastewater from the Fukushima plant into the Pacific Sea. The UN nuclear watchdog says it is closely monitoring Japan's dumping of water with an impartial standard. Let's find out more in this report.
Japan's decision to dump over 1 billion tons of radioactive waste from the Fukushima plant into the Pacific Sea has sparked a global outrage. Its neighbors have strongly opposed the decision, mainly due to the severe threat to marine and human life. The step has infuriated South Korea, Taiwan and China alike.
Both sides urged Japan to carefully and cautiously handle the Fukushima nuclear wastewater issue after ample consultation with international mechanisms and surrounding countries, and on the basis of substantial participation by the relevant countries and international mechanisms.
The International Atomic Energy Agency says it will be closely monitoring the effects of the decision. The agency aims to take measures during and after the controlled release of treated water into the ocean to prevent damage.
The work of the agency in cooperation with Japan will take place and will be organized before, during and after the controlled release release of treated water into the ocean.
Meanwhile, Japan says its move is safe from any potential hazard. But even at home, it has drawn concerns from the Fukushima area, where locals fear it will devastate the fishery industry.
2 years following an enormous blaze, the Notre-Dame Cathedral in France's capital, Paris, is going through a massive restoration process.
One of the finest examples of the French Gothic architecture, the Notre-Dame Cathedral, which was nearly destroyed 2 years ago in a massive blaze, is now on its way to restoration. Workers are currently busy in fixing the cathedral's vault, where once stood the long spire fell through in the building. It is being fitted with giant props, while a protective umbrella is being extended over its large opening for protection against the weather. The agency in charge of the restoration says the landmark is holding up and should be officially out of danger.
Écoutez, on a aujourd'hui des capteurs.
We have sensors since the fire, which are monitoring in real time the movements of the cathedral. It hasn't moved since the fire. It's holding up. We need to formally wait for the end of the securing stage to officially say that the cathedral is out of danger, but we see today that the building is holding up.
Till date, most of the work has been focused on the building's safety, including clearing up of toxic lead from the roof and melted spire. The restoration agency says the securing phase should last until the summer. The cathedral is set to open in 2024.
2 ans après l'incendie,
2 years following the fire, we are now ending the securing phase. This phase, which consisted in consolidating and securing the structure, will be finished this summer.
The blaze on the 15th of April 2019 destroyed the building's spire and roof, while the main bell towers and the outer walls were saved from collapsing. French President Emmanuel Macron undertook to restore the cathedral within 5 years.
Well, it's time for a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, while it might not seem like much, toy cars also produce many harmful emissions like the real automotive industry. To counter that, US toy maker Matchbox has launched its new series of environment-friendly cars. Let's find out more in this report.
With global warming on the rise and its harmful effects becoming more apparent, sustainability has become one of the foremost issues worldwide. An environmentally concerned consumer base has forged businesses to increasingly shift towards recyclable products. Matchbox's new series of toy cars is based on real-life electric and hybrid vehicles and is a bid to make miniatures viable. Electric charging stations will also go on sale this year.
We are unveiling a concept car, just like the real car industry does. This is the Tesla Roadster car, and is the first diecast made 99% recycled materials.
The first model of the production line is a scaled-down version of the Tesla Roadster. It will be joined by toys based on cars made by Nissan, Toyota, and BMW. Matchbox says it wanted to raise awareness among children of the environmental impact of motoring.
We wanted to work with Tesla to inspire kids as the future drivers of tomorrow. We think their parents will love to see how their kids play with cars that encourage environmental consciousness, like electric cars.
The launch is part of an overhaul in Britain and Europe at Matchbox, which is a subsidiary of the US toy giant Mattel. The Matchbox brand was created nearly 70 years ago and sells nearly 40 million die-cast vehicles each year.
And the Wall Street stocks have touched record highs of upbeat earnings from several companies and a strong rebound in March retail sales. With rapid vaccinations, investors hope for a broader economic rebound. The shares of Apple, Microsoft and Amazon surged, taking the S&P 500 technology sector to trade nearly 1% up. Nasdaq Composite traded over 1% higher, while the DJI index also gained ground. Meanwhile, oil prices surged to a near one-month high as demand forecasts raised. Now in football, Real Madrid and Manchester City have cruised into the semis of the Champions League. Real marched ahead after holding onto a goalless second-leg draw against Liverpool to complete a 3-1 aggregate win. The Reds missed several glorious chances tonight as Real defended with defiance and resilience to seal their win. The Spanish side will now clash with Chelsea in the Final Four. Meanwhile, goals from Riyad Mahrez and Phil Foden helped Manchester City book their last four spot. City beat Borussia Dortmund 2-1 in the second leg to secure a 4-2 aggregate triumph. Pep Guardiola's side will now take on Paris Saint-Germain for a place in the final. Now, in the National Basketball Association, Luka Doncic has led Dallas Mavericks to a stunning 114-113-point win over the host Memphis Grizzlies. The win puts an end to a two-game slide for Dallas. Doncic recorded 29 points with 9 assists for the Mavericks, followed by Kristaps Porzingis adding 21 points. Grayson Allen scored career best of 23 points for the Grizzlies but could not prevent their defeat. Meanwhile, Los Angeles Clippers edged Detroit Pistons 100-98 to extend their winning streak to 7 games. Reggie Jackson finished with 29 points for the Clippers, while Ivica Zubac had 18 points and 13 rebounds. In other contests, Milwaukee Bucks dominated Minnesota Timberwolves 130-105 points, while Washington Wizards downed Sacramento Kings 123-111. Well, Olympics always brings excitement and enthusiasm among the inhabitants of the host city, but the COVID-19 pandemic has dampened all the thrilled residents of the Tokyo were expecting. This report has details.
The countdown to the Games has reached the 100-day mark on Wednesday. However, the organizers are facing a deluge of challenges as the pandemic rages. This is also affecting decisions on everything from athlete safety to the number of spectators in venues.
The situation is very difficult now, but these athletes are pushing themselves and preparing for the Games. For the athletes to be able to stand at the starting line with confidence, the support of the people will become very important. So I hope that the words of the encouragement from as many people as possible will reach the athletes. I pray that the Games will be a success.
Amid a rise in infections, some parts of Japan are implementing strict curbs to control the spread. Fearful residents are therefore not in favor of holding the Games in such harsh conditions.
To be honest, I am not really in favor of holding the Games. If they hold them, then they really need to take firm antivirus measures. I feel a bit uneasy.
The organizers, on the other hand, are hopeful for smooth conduct of the showpiece event. The Olympics are scheduled to be held from the 23rd of July to the 8th of August.
Now let's have a look at how the weather is doing around the globe. Well, that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.